There is a link between the first reading today and the first reading last Sunday. The writer, the Semitic James, presumably first Bishop of Jerusalem, is very concrete in his bits of advice. He has the advantage of not being theoretic and abstract, but down to earth. I would like to extend what I had started on last week on an issue which he explores even further in this reading. It is the link between the ear and the mouth. In his writing, he is apparently disjointed. He goes from one point to another without an apparent reason or link. And so he comes out of the blue with this. Anyone who thinks he has some kind of religion and cannot master, control, handle his own tongue, that person's religion is futile. Now, I want to analyze a few very concrete issues. The Lord gave us a hint in the very physical way that he put us together. We have 2 ears and 1 mouth. Maybe the Lord is saying to us by that very fact, the proportion of words should be for every 2 coming in, 1 coming out. When we were in formation in France, they were fairly keen on getting us to master the chant. There was no musical instrument, but we had to be bang on, otherwise we were corrected in choir. And so it was all to do with calculating the natural law and mentally going from there. But in the book we had in the cell indicating how to master the chant Gregorian on one's own, this was writ large. On chante avec l'oreille. One sings with the ear. Translate. One speaks with the ear. I mentioned last week that many conversations are non-starters, and one has but to observe how that is the case. People who do not let the other person finish, attacking a point before he's got there. Now, before I leave that point, I want to bring another which is collateral. With regard to the way in which we receive, we are even more handicapped now than when this was being written. You will find in your conversation, I think not a few times in your experience, that if you are with a person and the mobile phone rings in that person's pocket or purse, that the instinct of that person will be what? To answer it. And okay, it might be just to say, I'll bring you back. That's feasible. But it might not be. They might start off with, do you mind if I answer or if I take this call? And of course, out of courtesy, you'll say yes, and they'll still be at it in your presence. I remember actually, and I shouldn't be repeating this, but it'll make a point, when it came to having to say for the first time in chapter, in community, that I was hoping to come away, and that was a big thing to say in chapter, I remember at that very point, somebody in the chapter, and somebody of weight, was actually sending texts on his mobile phone. In other words, the virtual reality of something out there was more important than what was going on in the heart and the future of the community. As I say, I should not be repeating that, but that's what we're at. People don't realize how far things have gone in the dysfunctionality of our communion and communication. I was told just the other day, and I'll give you this as another example, but this is a bit extreme. However, it shows it also in a different way. It's what's coming in now with regard to the way that people cannot switch off from this virtual communication. Because it's not just answering the mobile phone, it's texting, and texting without stop. Because one text demands another, and the answer demands an answer, and the answer of the answer demands an answer, and on it goes. That's the virtual reality which has become the reality. Now this happened only recently, a couple of weeks ago it seems. I think it was in the States. A young man, perhaps his early 20s, was in the car, driving. And what was he doing? He was actually trying in a hurry to text back his best friend. And from what was on the messages, it could be read that there was one which said something like this: "Yes, that sounds like a plan." But then this other one came up. Obviously that had called for an answer. It went something like this: "I will What happened there? For one fraction of a second, he must have looked at his mobile phone while driving the car. Eternity in 1 second of distraction. That is the insidious way in which we're messing up our time on earth. We are living in a virtual reality. Now, go further, and you be honest yourself. When you go home, what will you do? You'll first of all catch up on your messages, is that not true? Then what will you do? You'll open up a screen, will you not? And you'll Google and goggle and watch the virtual again and get sucked into the cybersphere, will you not? One YouTube calls forth another. All the time on earth into virtual reality. Now, that's already the dysfunctionality of our perceiving. And I'll leave you at the end with a sonnet on the whole art of the contrary. Hearing in depth, therefore, for once abdicating in our control over noise in the air and receiving as empty vessels. That's the departing point. But the other, and I want to go into just a couple of details today, it's the use, therefore, of the response, which will be far more interesting and accurate if it's hitting the point. And that can only be perceived if we've got it. And the point often is not actually said. It's left hinted at for us to pick up. Now this. The futility and the illusion of a person who's spending lots and lots of time in prayer and worship and incense, and then what? He's doing two things without batting an eyelid. He's using the tongue which has been glorifying God to upset a living tabernacle. Often a living tabernacle with whom he's bound in sacred matrimony, and therefore vowing to love and to cherish until death part them. The other is this. They will use that same dagger to pierce the Sacred Heart. And quite a few times now, lots of times I would say, in my priestly life, I have found two things. People during the course of the celebration of a sacrament, notably the sacrament of penance, using foul language, really bad language, in a sacrament, and not even copying on. And the other is this: people in the presence of the angels and the Lord of angels himself, I mean in the chapel, doing the same. I now, by the way, do not bring people straight away into the chapel in the Hermitage, because I have found that it's happened once too often that people are coming out not just with loud words but foul words in the presence of the Blessed Sacrament of the angels which guard it. But it could be your case. I just finished with this. It has been noticed in the last period of time that what, when we were growing up, was considered the limit in bad words and considered to be very serious when a child started to use them, is now being used by the most pious souls and even consecrated souls. Do you know what certain words mean? Look up in some kind of encyclopedia and you'll be surprised. You should not be using the B word. It's reference to our Blessed Lady, by Our Lady, and so on. They all are holy or vulgar words. And the devil knows it and pushes that they may be used to the maximum. He is greatly consoled when a holy soul messes up the air with bad words. I just finish to round it up. That horror is perceived when one spends a lot of time in the presence of the Blessed Sacrament and of, therefore, the shield of angels which protects it. Why? When one comes out of an hour of being bathed, one has something of what Paul calls the mind of Christ and of the angels. One senses by a sixth sense certain things cannot be good. And therefore, by having the Divine Master as the interior master, one knows without a single book, this I will not tolerate. So work on it, my friends, and I leave you these two sonnets to make the point, because people remember things when they see them in writing.